on peace and security in Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan has lasted through 2 American presidencies and threatens to run into a third. Discussion of the issue has reverberated at world bodies. The long-term effects on late 20th century international relations of those last days of 1979 when the Soviet military invaded Afghanistan have yet to be assessed because the war is not over yet. Taking refuge in euphemisms, the Soviet Union has insisted that the invasion be referred to as the intervention of foreign troops in discussions and resolutions condemning their presence in the country. The tendency to cynically dismiss the Afghan situation as a struggle between superpowers is beginning to give way to a concern for the physical survival of the Afghan people and their ability to preserve their culture. There is also less of a tendency now to romanticize the bang-bang of the Afghan war scene and shift focus to the psychological damage, the destruction of the land and the ecological system, and the brutalization of all those concerned, including the Russian and other Soviet soldiers, thrown into a war with few opportunities for heroism and many opportunities to kill. Dr. Felix Ermacora, writing for the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, has documented in 3 reports the serious abuse of human rights in Afghanistan and its root causes, the widespread opposition to the Soviet-installed Afghan regime, and the imposition of an alien culture on an historically independent people. Amnesty International has appealed to Kabul on behalf of several intellectuals. One of them was here at Harvard for a number of years and is now in prison, and has received no reply from Kabul with regard to these intellectuals and the systematic use of torture against political prisoners. The International Red Cross has been barred from visiting Afghan prisons since the beginning of the war, except for a brief period in 1982. Yet, there is a peace process underway at Geneva. Through it, the Office of the Secretary General of the United Nations acts as an intermediary between Kabul and the Pakistan government. The real combatants, the Soviet Union and the Afghan resistance, do not officially talk. With our guests today, we will discuss the prospects for peace and security in Afghanistan. Peace because over the last year, the Soviet Union appears to have made the decision to seek a political solution instead of the quick military victory that it expected originally. This may eventually be reflected at Geneva. Security because ultimately the future security of the area rests in the settlement of this issue and the return of the 5 million refugees to their homes. Our guests today are Wakil Akbartai, Director General, Mujahideen Refugee Relief Committee, and Mohammed Attab, Political Advisor to Jamiat-e-Islami, which is the organization to which Ahmad Shah Massoud, the well-known commander of the Panjshir Valley and areas in the northeastern part of Afghanistan, belongs. Dr. Don Farr, the
the largest refugee problem in the world. In fact, it's the largest refugee problem in history. And it's tragically the refugee problems of my country, Afghanistan. Today, 8 years after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, nearly 50% of my nation's population are refugees. We have 5 million external refugees and 2 million internal ones. And as Soviet violence has been escalated in the last year, more and more Afghans are being driven from the country. In the last 3 months of 1986, more than 100,000 people have been forced to leave and flee from repressive massacre against the civilian population or Moscow's deliberate scorched earth policy have been forced to leave their homes. The number I've just given you have even more impact when one realizes that today 1 in 2 of the world's refugees is Afghan. These numbers have been created logistically problems of enormous proportions. Iran has accepted 1.5 million Afghans, and Pakistan has taken 3.5 million. For Pakistan, this is the equivalent of being asked to absorb the entire population of Israel or New Zealand. And as I'm sure you're aware, Pakistan itself is the 9th most populous nation in the world and one of the least developed. Obviously, then the Afghan refugee situation in Pakistan has turned into a really nightmare. Let me give you a few examples of this. When refugee family arrives in Pakistan, they cannot receive tents, food, blankets, or any other medical aid until they are formally registered. Because of the bureaucratic backlog and this paperwork, families will wait an average of 3 to 9 months, sometimes as long as 18 months, before they are registered. I've seen children arrive having walked from weeks over Afghanistan's tough mountains terrain. Often through snow, they have been barefooted with only the tattered clothes on their backs. Their family possessions haven't been left behind when they leave and fled the bombing of their villages. The kids' feet have been bleeding, their toenails torn off or destroyed from frostbite. Mothers have been distraught because their youngest children or infants have died from the cold or from hunger on the journey. They have had to travel at night because the Soviets used refugee caravans as travel practice. And traveling at night increases the chance of refugees treading on the many mines that have been scattered along the exit passage to neighboring countries. Many times groups of refugees arriving in Pakistan are carrying 1 or 2 young youngsters whose legs have been blown off on the journey from these mines. And the first medical attention we receive is when they reach us. This is the condition of the refugees when they arrive. Imagine their horror and disbelief when they learn that for them being a refugee does not translate into receiving refuge, at least not for many weeks or months. The resistance unity created my job, Mujahideen Refugee Relief, in an attempt to bridge the gap between the arrival and the registration. When we have sufficient supplies, we will make refugees families to give them tents, a few blankets and clothing, tea or some sugar. It's a pitiful amount when we have supplies. And often we do not have enough to go around, or we frequently run out of it. Because of this, you will see many refugee families huddled under pathetic shelters made from torn pieces of plastic, sheeting, or an old shawl or blanket. And one needs to remember that in the summer, the camps, the temperature reaches 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and in the winter, the same. This means their children die of heat stroke and dehydration in the summer, or they die during the cold nights in the winter. Once a family is registered, even then their problems do not end. Food and water supplies to the camps are frequently disrupted, sometimes for days at a time. Medical aid is frequently scanty. The Afghan refugee camps have the second highest infant mortality rate in the world, second only to Liberia. According to a study by your own Center for Diseases Control, 1 in 3 Afghan children in the camps will die before the age of 5. The majority of these youngsters will die from diarrhea, easily preventable with inexpensive rehydration salts, malaria, measles, and tetanus. Also, all easily preventable. But it isn't just the children who have health problems in the camps. The maternal death rate among the refugees is the highest in the world. And tuberculosis is at a crucial level. 30% of the adults and children are infected. Before the war in Afghanistan, malaria and tuberculosis both have been wiped out. Our problems in the camps include lack of education. We have nearly 2 million children in the Pakistan camps, and there are schools for only 70,000. And most of those schools are limited to just a few grades. Funding for income-generating programs was slashed in 1985 when world attention was focused on famine in Africa. And at that time, even the Afghan refugee families' allotment of kerosene was slashed in half. And without kerosene, the refugees cannot cook their 1 meal a day because the camps are in mostly forested areas and there is no wood for cooking fires. These facts, of course, address only the physical condition for the refugees. It does not include their emotional conditions. War, trauma, depression, overutilization from their homeland, and other psychological problems are a major problem in the camps today. Because conditions for the refugees in Pakistan are not ideal, the Afghan resistance has started a program which is working extremely well in areas where we have been able to implement it. In liberated areas of Afghanistan, resettlement program has enabled refugees to return back to their homeland. We have been able to supply tractors, seeds, and livestock, and emergency food supplies until the refugees can construct new communities for themselves. This resettlement program achieves 3 main points and objectives. It is a tremendous moral booster for the refugees themselves when they are able to return to Afghanistan. It restores their dignity when they can support their families again. And until you have been a refugee, you can have no idea of the value of the word dignity and the ability to be self-supported. It is less expensive for foreign relief agencies to maintain refugees inside Afghanistan than to support it into the refugee camps either in Iran or Pakistan. And lastly, the resistance cannot operate in depopulated areas of Afghanistan, which of course is the Soviets' intention when they drive people out of the country and try to live and let on the local population for food and other supports. By enabling the civilian population to return to Afghanistan, we ensure the resistance can continue with the struggle. But obviously, such a program is limited by both funding and by lack of areas safe enough for us to resettle vast number of refugees. Then these are just a few of the problems that Afghan refugees population face. Thank you for coming and listening to us.
left the country, and 2 million more are in mountains, in military shelter, and the rest of that, they are struggling for survival. The physical destruction of Afghanistan, which includes 75% of all the towns and villages, is a problem. But more than that, the culture of this nation is facing destruction and elimination by the Soviet forces, and they are suffering. So because of this, not only from a political point of view, not only from a military point of view, studying this problem and paying attention to that one from a humanitarian point of view is very, very important. The resistance in Afghanistan started in 1978 when a regime, which was a communist regime, a minority party, took the power by a coup. This minority party then tried to impose a way of life which was opposing the norms and standards of our society on the people of Afghanistan. The people had every right to resist that, but they turned to violence, arrested people, tortured people, and even used armies. Then the people were forced to take arms and fight back, and in 1 year, the communist forces were about to be defeated. The Soviets, who had long-term policies in Afghanistan to spread their influence, to go beyond the borders of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Indian Ocean, could not see that happen. This is why they sent their troops in Afghanistan, and in 7 years the war is going on. The behavior of the Soviet forces in Afghanistan is a story itself. Burning of forests, killing of people, sowing mines, and using the most sophisticated weapons which the Soviets have made. And they were claiming that they will use it against anti-communist forces. They used it against ordinary peasants and poor people of Afghanistan. Look, you may think that the Su-25 jets, which are the most sophisticated weapons of the Soviets, are being used to destroy the ordinary villages and kill the cattle and destroy the mosques and the worship places of the people of Afghanistan. We are facing genocide, and we have every right to defend ourselves. But this doesn't mean that we do not desire for peace. Peace is our first aim. We were forced to take guns when we were disappointed. And as soon as the enemy comes in time, we are ready to talk about it. But what is going on in Geneva, what the Soviets have as a ceasefire and national reconciliation program in Afghanistan is not what we are wanting. Soviets, especially Mr. Gorbachev, announced the withdrawal of some forces from Afghanistan. It was interpreted as a sign of goodwill and the beginning of a solution to the problem of Afghanistan. But we observed that the Soviets did not draw the forces which were engaged in the war. They draw only anti-aircraft units which were never used in the war in Afghanistan. And because of that, they failed to prove in action that the main purpose of the withdrawal of their forces was to find a solution. We saw that they used it for propaganda purposes. At the beginning of this year, they launched another political offensive, and that was that they told to their puppets in Afghanistan to announce a program, so-called reconciliation, and to announce a 6-month ceasefire. This was done also in order to disarm the resistance, because they were calculating that the resistance, which is badly equipped, facing problems, population of very high, refugees in the camps or homes, they may They were disappointed by the unity of all the forces fighting against the Soviets. They were disappointed by the response of the refugees in the camp, and they were also disappointed by the determination of the commanders inside Afghanistan. Why we rejected the ceasefire? Because the people of Afghanistan are united in one thing, and that is the withdrawal of Soviet forces. And there is nothing in Afghanistan as national reconciliation, because the nation is united and there is no struggle between one part of the nation against the other. The presence of a puppet regime should not be very confusing. In any country, when an invading force comes, a few thousand people volunteer to serve the invading forces against the will of their people. They are not very big number, and they are not part of their own people. They are servants. And because of that, they do not deserve to be taken seriously. And they do not deserve to be recognized as a party in the conflict. Our position is that there are two parties in the conflict in Afghanistan. They are the Soviets and majority. If there is any solution, it should be between these two. This is why we think that the present format of Geneva talk is useless. Useless because it failed to stop the massacre of millions of Afghans. It failed to stop the influx of refugees from Afghanistan since 1982. From 1982 until now, more than 2 million people have become refugees. And the Soviets used this Geneva talk in order to do what they did. To us, the solution to the problem of Afghanistan is not a military solution, but a political solution which is backed up by a military activity, what we all visit later. We believe that the Soviet Union as a superpower has a lot of weak points. It has a lot of responsibilities for the rest of the world. Making use of these points will force the Soviets to accept a solution which gave back the right of the people of Afghanistan to them, and that is to restore the freedom and the Islamic and non-aligned status of Afghanistan. Geneva talk, which is going on between Pakistan and Pakistan, I don't think will result in something which we want. Because Pakistan, as the host of the millions of refugees, has every right to speak with anybody who wants. But when it comes to the future of Afghanistan, we do not give any right to any person anywhere to talk to us. We are the only people who should speak for us. On the other hand, the Soviets have kept away themselves from these talks. This means that if there is any agreement, then they will not be directly obliged to abide by it. And they will have the ability to maneuver because they are not a signature of any solution there. The alternative to this Geneva talk, I think, would be the implementation of the resolutions of the United Nations, General Assembly of the United Nations, in which they clearly ask for the right of self-determination. While in the present Geneva format, the right for self-determination is not mentioned and is not discussed, because there the puppet regime is accepted as a side. I believe that the present moves of the Soviets, although it seems very new, and we welcome any move which ends that war in Afghanistan. Nobody can be more interested in peace in Afghanistan than the people of Afghanistan themselves. But real peace is something, and deceiving people is something else. What we see is that the Soviet leaders are trying to minimize the cost of the war in Afghanistan by talking about peace and withdrawal. There is one test in case of Soviets. If they to find a solution to the problem of Afghanistan, they have to prove, they have to show that they respect the rights of the people of Afghanistan for self-determination. And that is the right that every country has, that is the right which has been supported by all the nations. And we, as Afghans, should not have that. And that means that the people of Afghanistan, as soon as the Soviets leave, should be able to choose the type of government that they like. If the Soviets do not change this attitude, I'm sure even if they withdraw their forces, they reinvent it. Because the same problem that existed in 1978 still exists. And they insist on a puppet regime which is rejected by the people of Afghanistan. So this is the core of the problem. We welcome any peace movement, but we, at the same time, reject any halfway solution. We do not have any more problems with the Soviets. The only problem with the Soviets is that we want our total freedom. They let us to mind our own business, and they should go and to their own country. After that, we can have normal relationship with the Soviets we had before.
I should say that to Layla Helm, we owe the presence of our guest because it was the organization in New York called Friends of Afghanistan that arranged for this visit, which carries these guests has carried them already to Princeton and Yale, and will carry them farther south and to Washington as well. Layla Helm then is going to summarize what Dr. Dagfar's report and Mr. Gailani's presentation.
I'd like to thank the school for having me to speak here. It's a forum that hopefully will help them. Dr. Azam Dagfar is a psychiatrist, and he heads the Center for Afghan, Psychiatric Center for Afghans in Peshawar, Pakistan. He was imprisoned as political prisoner in 1978 under the Taqi regime and remained there for 14 months in Taqi prison. After being released and being tortured, he went to Iran and Pakistan and down in refugee camps, conducted a number of studies to find out what the number of torture victims were, the percentage of torture victims among people who were in prison, and basically to draw a paper on the whole concept of psychological warfare in Afghanistan. His point that he makes in his talks is that more than anything, resistance in Afghanistan is a resistance of will, and that through torture and inhumane treatment, the Soviets tried to rape the will of the people. And he documents in his reports the methods of torture. Specifically, he documents systematic beating, and then most of all, the things that are most common in Afghanistan are degrading the culture and the religion by torturing members of the family and electrical shock to genitalia and so forth. And he documents these things. He is working with Amnesty International in producing more and more documents on the whole scope of torture in Afghanistan, and has worked with Dr. Omar in Geneva recently in the United Nations Human Rights Commission. He also has contributed to Helsinki Watch reports. Mohammed Gilani, Commander Mohammed Gilani, who is Deputy Military Chief of Staff of the National Islamic Front of Afghanistan, NIFA is one of the major resistance organizations of the seven-part community. He is a commander who led one of the largest offensives in Khost. He held Khost as a stronghold against the Soviets for a number of months, but what held him back was basically the lack of supplies. And his talks are mostly on Soviet strategy and how it's changed over the past few years, and how it's changed most recently, and also what Soviet tactics were pre-ceasefire, and then what's happened since the ceasefire. significant thing about his talks. And basically, he documents a lack of effective aid, such as after 7 years of war not having mine detectors or effective communication systems and things like that.
I'd like to. I'm sorry that these two guests couldn't be here, because I say they were ill, and they have a very rigorous speaking schedule too. And so it's not surprising they fell down halfway. Well, our questions then will be directed to Mohammed Attaf and to Wakil Akbarzai. I'd like to begin though by asking two questions that I think are pretty close to the heart of the issue as it is conceived in American political circles. And this has to do with with American supply to the resistance. Now, in recent months, we've heard a lot of talk about the supply of singers, and in the past, in the fall in particular, there was also a discussion of how well supplies were actually reaching the modernity. There's the problem with the orlicons and so forth. First of all, I'd like to ask whether the U.S. supply of stingers, orlicons, and the like contributes to lengthening or to shortening the war, and therefore increasing or reducing the prospects for peace.
I think that the introduction of any new weapon will hurt Soviets, and this is part of the war. The more you hurt them, the more they feel it, and the more they will be forced to think about it. While I cannot comment specifically about the type of weapon, but I can say that in the late 6 months, the abilities of the Mujahideen against in air defense have increased, and the number of the planes, jets, and helicopters that have been shot down has increased, and this contributes to the economic loss, the psychological problem for the Soviets, and also to the rise of the morale of the resistance. And because of this, if there is help or not, the Soviets intend to swallow Afghanistan. We have decided not to let that happen. We started with very limited number of guns. We proved that it's possible to stop and to stop all our armies, and they have not won the war in 7 years. I'm sure if there is proper help for the resistance, that will be force the aggressor to revise its policy. But that's not the only factor. There are other factors as well. The way it should be given, the way it should be combined with political and economic measures, this all will help together in order to force the Soviets to revise their policy. This is what we want.
Following up on that, I'd like to hear your reaction to a statement that was made by, I believe, Senator Cohen from Maine, in which he says that the United States should consider providing this military aid to the resistance, not covertly, but overtly, because providing it covertly simply means that the mismanagement of the military aid goes unnoticed. Do you feel that to offer this help overtly rather than covertly would harm the resistance in any way?
Well, the point is that aid to the resistance is of two types. The humanitarian aid, which must be open and must be discussed. It's a mean through which the people of one country contribute to the cause, and this is the way that the attention of the people is drawn to the cause, and it's very easy to be accountable to that and provide the right accounting for that. This is what we are doing, but it is very limited. As far as other aid for what aid is concerned, it is the Soviet policy all the time, try to say that the war in Afghanistan is the war between American interest and the Soviet interest, or the war between the West and East. And because of that, any form of aid which gives the critics in their hand that there are involvements, it will, they want to discredit in the eyes of the third world countries. So because of that, I think the proper aid would be that it is given in a proper way. And because of this, we have to not to help the Soviets by giving any aid in a way that now that, for example, 6 months before anything which is rejoining, there are a lot of publicity on the papers, and this will encourage the Soviets to attack more and drive more people out, and you are not sure if something comes or not. If the money is available, the Mujahideen can buy from any type of weapon from the international market, whether being leveled American or Chinese or Pakistani or anything else. We have one condition in aid, that is that we accept aid from any country, but that's not attached to strength. But in case of superpowers, we are more in favor of keeping ourselves a little away because of the sensitivity of the third world countries, which we are part of that. So because of this, I cannot comment whether America has given aid or not, but this is generally what I feel about the aid which should be given to the resistance. We should try to help the resistance, not create problems.
One more issue that I'd like to raise, and I'm raising it because it may not be very well known, and that is the issue of resettlement within Afghanistan that is being forced by Kabul. In other words, in the Ermakora report, there is statements that Kabul is trying to shift about 500,000 people from the eastern part of the country, that is the border area that is so sensitive, the Pashtun area, that is trying to shift these people over to the northwestern border, which is closer to the Soviet Union. I'd like to know, Mr. Ackerbach, whether you've heard this report and whether you've seen any of its manifestations and what you think the implications would be.
Actually, they intended to do an intelligence such work, but they did not achieve anything as the situation is not normal, it's totally out of their reach. They have recruited few militias from different areas, like militia from the eastern part of Afghanistan, moving it all the way to the center. And they did it only with few recruitment, but the rest they were not in a position to move basic resettlement issues to Afghanistan.
I'd like to throw it now open to a discussion from the floor, and if we have questions, perhaps it would be best for you to move to one of the microphones so that you can be heard if you have a question.
Good evening. I have 3 questions.
Can you do one?
Sure. Most reports and journalists enter Afghanistan through Pakistan. So most of the reports that come out of Afghanistan detail the situation in eastern Afghanistan. Could you tell us anything on the present situation in 1, northern Afghanistan, bordering the Soviet Union, 2, the situation in the Shiite central part of Hazarajat, and in the Pamir, at the Wakhan corridor bordering on China and Tajikistan?
There are some determined journalists did not go only to east, but they have even made their way all the way to west and northwest Afghanistan also. As earlier been put, that it's a national uprising. The whole nation stood against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The situation in the resistance is as strong as east as well as in northwest through the length and breadth of Afghanistan. If you take into account that eastern zone, lately there have been enormous Soviet offensive directed to particular coast and regions in Jalalabad and other areas. And you might have come across two recent reports in the northern western Afghanistan, all the way start from Dhaka and Pakistan, Congress area, heavy fighting is going on. To the Shia and region, particularly central part of Afghanistan, the resistance does continue, and it's as equally good as the other part of Afghanistan. There is no particular differentiation that a particular clan, tribe, or group are fighting, not the other. It's been involved almost all parts of Afghanistan, all involved in fighting. Different levels of their own resources, terrain, and logistical conditions prevailing in the regions.
Yes, I would like to ask you what one single thing you think would be the best thing for a private American citizen to do in order to help your cause. I mean, there's a lot of people in the audience who are involved in trying to send medical supplies to your country, or trying to increase the awareness here of what's going on in your country. So I would like to know from you, what do you think is the best thing that we can do as American citizens to try and help you solve the problem?
I think the best thing one can do as a private citizen is that to raise the public awareness of the people about the situation in Afghanistan. And when that is done, I think the rest of that will follow. Because in democratic countries, the government usually, if they want or not, they have to follow what the people are telling them. And because of this, in order to be support economically or politically, if the people want, there is awareness among the people, if there is support among the people, then that is done in a good way. So the best part is to form committees or friendships with Afghanistan and trying to go, especially among the young people, in order to lend their support for the cause, and try to expose as much as possible the atrocities which are committed against the people of Afghanistan, and project that to the common citizen, because once the people know, we are sure that even it's not easy for the government to sell out, forget, or ignore the cause. So this is what I think, that the grassroots support for a cause means the survival of that cause. And this is what we need.
My question is directed toward Mr. Ashok. My impression of Afghanistan is a rather backward country made up of a lot of different independent tribes. And it doesn't seem to me very likely that there could be any sort of democracy the way the United States or the Western countries knows it. So I'm not exactly sure what you mean by self-determination, democracy, as you put it. My question is, what type of government was there in Afghanistan before the communists took over, and why was it so unstable that the communists could take over? And secondly, if you got your country back, what type of government would you have now? Is it influenced by revolutionary Iran, and what type of
do not agree with you that I agree with you that Afghanistan is economically a backward country, but I do not agree that the people awareness about democratic value is so low. Because a student studies 5-10 years in a college to learn some basic things. The people of Afghanistan are living under fire for 8 years. How they do not know the value of freedom, the value of choosing leaders? If we had good leaders in the past, we had not faced this problem. And on the top of that, there is a big change, grassroots change, taking place in Afghanistan. Old bureaucrats, old landlords who are controlling Afghanistan power, they are out of Afghanistan now. The burden of war has fallen on the shoulder of ordinary men who had grassroots background. Any commander, influential, you see he is either a student, or he is a teacher, or a religious scholar, or a farmer. With these type of people who are used to the suffering of their own people, who are used, who know the depth of the suffering of their own people, and they are living in harmony with their people. It is very wrong to think that. In Afghanistan, there is not any system existing at the moment. In any good of water, you eliminate one and you develop another. This is what is taking place in Afghanistan. We have communities in the liberated areas of Afghanistan which comprise 50% of the land and most of the population. We have health communities, we have educational communities, we have cultural communities, we have judicial communities that take care of law and order. And I tell you, the heads of all these communities are chosen by the people. And for the first time, a type of basic democracy, not an advertisement, but of real function has come to exist. So this is why I say that people are more aware. And if you ask today the people of Afghanistan what you want, they say goodbye to the past. Let's start it from the beginning, from now. This is why anybody who raises advice from America to form an Israeli government, or anybody who is raising advice from Rome, the people say no. You are not sharing our pain. You don't have to deserve to come here. The people who share our pain, they are fighting, they have the right to represent them. So this is why I think that basic democracy, democratic values are there. We believe in it. Our religion supports that one. On the other hand, Afghanistan is different from Iran in a lot of ways. Here, Iran has problems with America. The people are a little nervous on both sides. They accuse each other in a different way. While in Afghanistan, the war is against Soviets. The people of Afghanistan have been supported somehow by the Western democracy. The French feeling is there. We are going ahead, not backward. We like the prosperity of our country. Now, the most fundamentalist party in Afghanistan, they have colleges for the girls and the shower. Isn't it a fraud? In Afghanistan, there was last time, but not all. The most conservative parties have this one, and they are increasing the number. So it's a change taking place. We are not going backward, we are going forward. Our eyes have opened, and the war has taught us a lot.
During the Second World War, so-called governments in exile were formed in the West and recognized in the West as legitimate representatives of people of nations under Nazi occupation. How do you explain that no such Afghan government in exile has been formed? Is it due to a lack of willingness on the part of Western governments to recognize such a government?
We, the government in exile, we have not been recognized as a freedom fighters yet, in a formal sense. We came last year to see Mr. President Reagan, and our first demand was that thank you for the humanitarian aid. Now is the time that we should be recognized as the representative of the people of Afghanistan. His advisors told him no, it's premature, and no. We asked him that if he deserved your appreciation, why do you have in the And the first camp that all we recognize as a liberation movement here, the whole status that we have, the strength of us is that we are strong in Afghanistan, we are Afghans, we are fighting. And the weakness of that is that we are not recognized as a liberation movement. And anywhere that we go, we are refugees. We have to, this is the core of the problem. I think the Western countries and the rest of the countries, including neighbors of Afghanistan, there's only one country who has a relationship with the Qatari regime, and that's Saudi Arabia. The rest of the countries, including Pakistan, it's my criticism. We owe to Pakistan a lot, we owe to Iran a lot because of their hospitality. But the problem is that still they have their embassies there, still they have their trade, northern trade. Thousands of trucks move back and forth along the border as if nothing has happened. So it is a contradiction in the part of these countries, but we are asking them to correct themselves. And they should decide either we are right and we are moving in a good direction, or they are right. Since we are right, so they should have that relationship. And if they have not done it so far, the problem of Afghanistan would have been solved. They are a member of the United Nations, they are a member of the non-aligned movements, and they are everywhere, but they represent nobody. So this is a problem. While there are parallels in other parts of the world, like Cambodia, they don't control very much, but they are represented in these bodies. So we, in the part of Afghanistan, we like that this double standard should be solved. And we, the people of Afghanistan, should be given the right as a liberation movement, and then to make it able to form a government in Afghanistan.
Are you trying to speak to the United Nations?
We are trying, but it needs the sponsorship of a lot of countries first, and then the support of two-thirds majority in the next General Assembly. It is one thing to outset the Qatari regime, and the second thing is to achieve this. We are thinking in these terms, because you know the Geneva talks and a lot of conservative approach to the problem of Afghanistan has prevented Mujahideen from taking proper steps in this direction.
Thank you. I've been asked to identify myself as a reporter before I begin my question under the Voice of America. My question concerns the refugee relief efforts by the Refugee Relief Committee. Mr. Dr. could you tell us a little bit more about it, when it started, how many people have been resettled, what the living conditions are of the refugees who have been resettled, and Mr. Ishaq, if you could comment on the attitude of the resistance toward this resettlement effort. Yes, by the Mujahideen Refugee Resettlement Committee.
All the resistance movement, they have different committees formed, start from political, military, judicial, education, and there are totally a couple of 14 different committees. And one of them is the Directorate of Relief for the Refugees in China. This committee takes care of the unregistered refugee in the Pakistan border, the Pakistan side, and the displaced refugees within Afghanistan. As I've already put it, sometimes it takes months together for refugee families to be registered, and often we have a gap between registration and newly arrived refugees. To fill this gap, to extend first an emergency aid and assistance, this committee was formed to fill this gap, and meanwhile not encourage further refugees from the liberated areas of Afghanistan to move into Pakistan, because we often have something like never less than 30,000 people to go to be registered. At the stage we have more than 50,000 awaiting registration. So some of those who stayed on the border areas awaiting registration and were desperate, and while studies were conducted that in some of the liberated regions where the Soviet ground forces could not reach them, we encouraged them back, and it was their own feeling of bombarded their village yesterday. 2 months later, when they found that situation is again calm and there are no more much bombardments, they try to go and see for themselves their own village and started living in another remote and far area from their own original villages. And we extended initial support, and we found out that it doesn't need to continue in every month, because they can get involved in some other socio-economic work within their own locality, in farming and other things. While in a refugee camp in Pakistan, you can't own property, you can't do and conduct a particular type of trade or business which will lead them, or can't work on farms and land if they can't have the right for property. So this is another encouraging factor for them to be initially helped and assisted. We have done in a couple of places, basically in 3 different provinces and 7 different areas, sub-districts, by providing couple of tractors or livestock, and initially supported with some food stuff, and they could continue to live. And sometimes, if not the full stream family, at least half the stream family was. Under each and every program, it was more than 100 to 370 families in different regions were accepted. And it was basically welcomed by the local commanders and as well as the general majority, because it was more of an intelligent factor that we could operate in areas and could survive in the local population. And they were more of a moral boosting for each side in that respect. That's, I think, my framework.
I think that the policy of the resistance as a whole was the problem is that first, the people should not come out of Afghanistan because of a lot of reasons. Because we drive our support from the local people for intelligence, logistics, and also manpower. If these people get out of the country, then we will be, I think, more weak. The experience has shown that those areas who are depleted from the population, they are weaker than those areas who have population. Because in the presence of population, the Mujahideen fight better and their morale would be high. But if they leave their families somewhere in exile, then they have to visit their families, and then they become a little tired and lose interest. So this is the best. But the main problem of keeping refugees is that how to make them able to stay. Because when they lose their property, when their cattle is killed and their farmers is in fire, then there are children, old people there. You have to feed them. This is the biggest problem of the resistance, which takes 60% of the whole energy of the commanders which deal with this. So far, there has been some private organizations and also some government organizations who have given some little help to these refugees inside Afghanistan. But it's a pilot project, and so far it is not covering all Afghanistan or a big portion of Afghanistan. We hope that this year or in the coming year there will be an increase in this in funds in order to make able the Mujahideen to help these people to remain inside Afghanistan. This is because their presence is so vital, and it's like water for the fish. So we have to keep it there.
So which is the organization that is helping within Afghanistan?
I think there are a lot of organizations who are work directly or indirectly. I think there are committees like the Norwegian Committee, Swedish Committee, Afghan Aid of British. I think there are some many said before, the regime started announced a ceasefire from January 15. The resistance leaders met for several days, discussed all the aspects of the ceasefire, and then rejected on the ground that if we accept an offer while the Soviets are present there, this means the recognition of a regime which doesn't have any credibility. And because of that, they say, while we are in favor of peace, we continue with our struggle until the Soviets, because a condition, Puppet regime was trying to use it as an anti-guerrilla tactic in order to disarm the resistance. Anybody who, it's very humiliating also when it says that if you lay down your arm and join the Revolutionary Guard or something like that, then we will give you immunity and all sorts of things like that. So it was rejected totally, and Mujahideen escalated attacks, and the Soviets admit that now the level of fighting has gone 2 times more. Then the Soviets themselves launched 2 offensives in Kandahar and Afghanistan and in Java. And also, there are also the fighting around Salem, the main highway from Kabul to Virginia. And more than that, they escalated their activities inside Pakistan. They exploded bombs in the school children, which killed a big number of students and injured them. And then they attacked also the refugee camps along the border. So the situation is more tense than before. And I can say that the ceasefire program of the Puppet regime, which was launched for the purpose of deceiving the world public opinion and deceive the refugees and the majority, faced failure, and now it doesn't exist. And the Mujahideen position is that continuing struggle. The enemy is not offering something which is acceptable.
Mr. Akhtarzai and Mohammed Eshat. Does the Russian army make use of landmine warfare against the Afghan civilian population? And if it does, is it on a large or small scale? And what kind of civilian casualties result? Do you have any landmine detectors? And if the Russians are using landmines, are they using non-metallic landmines?
Yeah. Well, we have experienced as the caravans and the refugee families leaving Afghanistan, and often there are 1 or 2 cases of mine affected. Just an anti-person mine. And Soviets have also widely used mines to demoralize the Mujahideens and fortify their military strongholds and positions also. Regarding the mine detectors, unfortunately so far we don't have effective one, but few who were brought in through friends. One was only metal detectors, which was not the most effective piece of equipment against mines. Soviet used is basically plastic covered mines. It was not easy for ordinary metal detector to detect mine under plastic cover. This kind of comment on
the way that they plan mines is either through it by helicopters or jet, and recently they have used rockets also in order to sow mines on the passes. I think the passes are often used by the refugees to come out, and this is why it's a problem. And different types of mines are being used, and these plastic mines, which they are using a lot, and there are another type of mine we call it wave mine or seismic mine. And these seismic mines are the mines are very powerful, 6 or 7 of them connected to a sensor, in which when somebody approaches that one, it gives a signal to the closest one, and it explodes, and the rest of that is there. And then when you approach from the other direction, majority although have been able to find ways of diffusing them, but it has been very expensive because without proper training and equipment, it is very costly to learn a lesson. And this is why there are so many amputated people, and why there are so many people who have lost their arms and faces and all diffusing it. So that because they are demoralized, they planted each person individually without marking it. And it has been seen that it is not a planned military thing. They have done it on a way that each soldier has done it for himself. And when he has left the area, so that is laid there for the ordinary civilians and farmers and animals who come in order to clear them out. So it is, I think that even if the war is finished, for several years, this would be a problem for the population in Afghanistan, especially children.
Yes, my question is for Ms. Helms. Can you tell us just in general a little bit more about the Friends of Afghanistan, how and why it was formed, and what your focus and activities are, whether it's financial aid or public relations here in America? And then specifically, can you tell us, it seems amazing to me that there's such a lack of press coverage of this situation here in the U.S. Can you tell me from your experiences why you think that is and how that can be changed?
Afghanistan, when it was first formed, was as a recipient or prospective recipient of the USIA grant. Since then, the board of directors has changed considerably, and the focus of the organization has not been changed. It's basically made up of a group of volunteers, people who have traveled through Afghanistan and are very much in contact with what's going on inside. They are a non-partisan group and try to maintain their credibility as much as possible. The problem that spreading news on Afghanistan, disseminating any kind of information, basically, is the lack of understanding of Afghanistan in general. There are too many stereotypes. There's just not, for example, Afghanistan in its history has never had fundamentalists with clergy as a government, things like that. There's a lot of different stereotypes that one has to break through before the information itself gets through. Basically, one big problem is that, and the other big problem is the credibility. The journalists traveling to the show hear so many things from so many different sides that before they can report it, the news kind of cancels it out, and there's not much that they can say. There's a lot of proof behind it, unless they travel within the country. And traveling inside is a risk. Charles Wilson was killed in October of 1985. Since then, there hasn't been too many American reporters on this. There was just a lack of contact. The ways that we've been successful in trying to get media attention is basically to do it in as straightforward a process as possible and not really concentrating on political trouble in Afghanistan, but concentrating on the humanitarian side. And basically, if you do concentrate on humanitarian problems, it's impossible for the political side not to come out, because as the largest migration of people to date right now in our country, Afghanistan is a problem that the world's going to have to deal with for a long time, and that is beyond the politics of it. So that's an issue that we're really trying to raise more and more.
I might comment that Friends of Afghanistan operates in New York, but there are local organizations in almost every part of this country, including one here in the New England area, which has been active for about 6 years, called Free Afghanistan. Yes.
The news and media here in the United States, particularly I can name the Time magazine, reports a large amount of the United States military aid to the Afghan
do not reach the Afghan majority. I would like to know whether the role of CIA has given these aids, or do they participate, or the amount of aid is mismatched, or whether there is a serious problem receiving these aids inside Afghanistan, or if there is, who is mainly involved, mainly responsible for the disappearing of the aid, or whether there is a danger of similar situation is Iran-Contra situation where the aid was disappeared or go into the hands of the people.
As far as the aid is concerned, I think that anybody who was given to us something, we will give him accounting how much he has given and how much we have given to the majority. But the whole story of CIA and then those pipelines that you were talking about and all that, it is something that we are not aware of. Again, we say, if we get an aid, military aid, we don't think it's from CIA, we think that it's from the people of America. But we are not part of any deal in these things. It is not related to us. And because of that, we cannot say that is how much of that is true and why it has been published. And the government of America has not commented about that when we're joining or not in a position to comment about these things. But I think that the connection of CIA with the resistance is a deliberate policy of some people who try to discredit the Afghan resistance. Otherwise, why don't call it the gift of the people of America, if there is any gift to the majority who are fighting for their freedom? You are not fighting for Americans, but you are fighting for their freedom. And because of that, I think that those people who make these stories, I know them personally too. And this has become their disease to repeat CIA every day 10 times. But it's a problem.
If I can add just one thing to your question, the Afghans are very different from what's happening in Nicaragua and putting them on the same scale in the States. The Afghan people will resist whether aid gets to them or doesn't get to them, and that's something that should be understood because the consequences of that should they not receive aid, it won't be the same as in Nicaragua.
Being tonight's concept is peace and security in Afghanistan. How likely is it, however, that peace and security are attainable in Afghanistan given long-term Soviet objectives? What, in fact, in your view, are long-term Soviet objectives in their area of the world?
I think that people of everywhere, they thought that the long-term policy of the Soviets have war in Afghanistan to swallow Afghanistan. The only change which is witnessed now is from the statements of Mr. Gorbachev about peace and the possibility of withdrawal from Afghanistan, which is not matched yet by practical action. And because of that, it is open to the Soviets to prove that whether they want peace in Afghanistan or not. As far as we are concerned, we do not want that the war should continue more than 1 minute, which is necessary. We do not like to fire a bullet more than necessary. And this is why we are in favor of any peace. But peace to us, again I say, means that we have to be allowed to choose our destiny. We have to be allowed to live according to our beliefs. This is what we want, and on this we cannot compromise. And this is why the key is in the hands of the Soviet leaders. I hope they will do something, but so far I'm very doubtful that if they have real intentions, because I have not seen anything inside Afghanistan or anything substantial to believe that the war in Afghanistan is very close to its end and the peace will return to Afghanistan. So it's a very uncertain situation about prospect of peace in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan LAC has an office at 24 Farrell Street. You might want to stop by sometime. 12 Farrell Street. And also we're in the phone book. And possibly later would like to give their address up as well.
172nd Street. The number there is 212-787-0500.